All right, everybody, we are back for another edition. I should probably be in the screen. We're back for another edition of Go-to-Market Crossroads with my friends Zach and Harris. Gentlemen, how are we doing today? Happy Valentine's Day, I should say. It is Valentine's Day as we do this podcast episode. So what are your plans for Valentine's Day?
Oh my God, put me on the spot. I'm about to be busted later today because
You haven't planned, is what I'm hearing.
there are no plans. Yeah, plans are stay out of trouble, but that I already blew that.
Yeah, sounds like you're already in trouble. Okay. All right, Harris, what you got?
Well, a year ago today, just about, our second child, we went into labor. When my wife was doing all the work, went into labor with our second child. So his birthday is mixed with Valentine's. So it'll be family activities, celebrating him, and otherwise we're keeping it pretty simple. We've got our hands full, so no big trips to Paris or anything like that anytime soon.
Well, I did not plan this, but it's interesting. I too have a child whose birthday is today. So
there you go.
My son Wes is 9 today. So we share that in common.
Wow. That's awesome.
Great excuse to not have plans for the
It does help. It's not good for him, but it is good for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, happy birthday, Wes. Yeah, it is interesting how much when you grow the team, how much it affects your ability to spend time together as co-founders.
That's well played. Well, guys, before we get into the topic today, which I think it'd be fun to talk about really around email copy. So last week we got into deliverability. So, hey, once you get in the inbox, how do you create a message that's compelling enough for somebody to actually take action on that? But before we do that, I thought it'd be kind of fun. Maybe, is there anything you saw this week that you thought was interesting or that you want to highlight that's top of mind for you that's going on in the market or in the go-to-market landscape? I'd love to open it up just because I think it's a fun topic for us just to talk through a little bit. I can start if that's helpful, but I'll give it to y'all in case you got anything.
Well, I got a little bit of like a user feed or listener feedback, I should say. I don't know if he wants to be on the show, so I won't say his full name, but his name's Colin, founder of a B2B SaaS company, and he is scaling up this motion that we're talking about here. We talked about it a bit last week. He's using Instantly, and it was just like this very basic question of, okay, so I'm setting up these secondary domains, but I have my main email. When I get a reply, like, where am I supposed to reply from? And it's like, actually, that's a lot more complicated of a question than you think. And so I think like what's happening as like these tools are getting picked up by teams at scale, there's these questions like, okay, well, I've got 13 reps, 25 reps. Like, are they supposed to be logging into like 5 different Gmail accounts? Am I supposed to be using my sequencer inbox? Can they stay in the CRM? Like, I want them to be in HubSpot. Where are they supposed to work out of? And so I thought it was a really good question. And I think in general, like we're starting to see the growing pains that come with these tactics being adopted by teams at scale. The answer to him, by the way, was like, it's best to keep that secondary connection. So you'd want to ideally, if the sequencer like Instantly and Smartly, they have a universal inbox, ideally you would respond in there and then sort of post like meeting conversion, you would roll it over to the CRM. But I think like that one question reflects like a much larger thing of like, okay, this is great. We want to use outbound. We want to grow, but we have like internal stakeholders and process rules and fields that need to be completed or properties that need to be filled out or whatever. And so that I think is going to be what's like the thing over the course of this year that people are going to be coming to grips with of like, great, I'm in the inbox, but like that's 2% of my problem from, our sales org's perspective.
I love that. I think maybe slightly different, but like I was really encouraged to see this week some friends at Koala and Tofu both raised some nice Series A rounds, and I think they're I guess what excites me about that is like seeing momentum around tools that are really trying to help people like be more sophisticated and be really intelligent. I think not to pick on the AI SDRs too much, but like, they got a lot of hype and a lot of attention, and I definitely lean on the side of the fence of like, hey, go to market is really nuanced for every company, and I think you need a tool set that's like can be tuned and dialed in a bit more. And I know they're on a same same path and kind of spiritual belief. So I was really excited to see the momentum they have, and I think there's lots everything we're talking about. I think they play into that world too. So that was encouraging to see.
Well, it's like a bet on teams doing things differently, right?
Right.
I mean, fundamentally, it's like there's a few different ways people might tackle it, but investors and these teams and the people they're hiring and joining them believe that things aren't going to stay the same, right? Over the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, if you're raising a Series A, that means you've got some traction.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, I think it's good.
All right. Spill the beans, Brendan. What's
before we do that, I think go back to something you said too here. It's like I would love to have guests on. So by all means, I think it'd be really cool to bring in folks that are doing cool things around this topic that we can all learn from, because we're all learning together. And I think the more that we can bring people into the conversation, the better. From my perspective, I think I just wrote about it actually this morning, but I'm actually wearing a shirt that says HubSpot on it for those who are listening. They had another banger earnings report, and what I think is interesting to this group, beyond just the fact that they now have 248,000 customers, it's just that they've had I think they're very forward thinking around AI. They talk about it all the time, and I know AI is the biggest buzzword, but I think just seeing some of the early signals and traction that they're starting to see, really around this agents concept. I don't know if you guys saw just the level of growth within the agent side was pretty staggering around what they're seeing. I think it's 900,000 users are starting to embrace this. And Zach, even you were talking about the AI SDR, but even the way it's being used, not just for bots, but also being not just for content either, but really around driving meetings and the amount of meetings they create as a result of AI assisted sales development. I think there's just a really cool traction we're starting to see. So that was the fun update for me, is just seeing what's going on in their world that we play a small, very, very, very small role in.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I got a kid in the background, so we have to deal with that. Not the birthday boy. This is the youngest, who is the
one that's going on timeout.
Yeah, he is unpredictable, to say the least.
Birthday party crasher.
All right, guys. Well, let's get into the topic of the day that we're really here to talk about, which is really more what's going on, or how do we think about the copy that we're leveraging within these emails. So I know we talked about AI, but really, how do you take advantage of this personalization at scale? It used to be like, hey, insert first name with a generic email, and now there's so many more things you can do where AI can be a tool, but there's still really this aspect of relevancy. So I'll open up to you guys, maybe as it relates to what's changed, and like why should this be exciting, and ultimately why is this important? So maybe let's start with the foundation, and then we can get into some tips and tricks that you've seen be successful in this new world that we live in. So Zach, maybe I'll hand it over to you to start.
Yeah. Well, this is near and dear to my heart, of course, messaging and positioning, and that ultimately turns into copy. I think, there's lots of like tactical, what's the length, plain text versus not, like all those things we can kind of talk about. But I think, when we think about copy and like what we're, trying to help our customers do, but I think it's just like, how everyone should be thinking about it is, you need to speak your customer or prospect's language. Like, how do you speak to them in words and problems and pains that you believe they feel, right? Like, I think the real key and like where I see people being most successful is, you don't want your prospect to feel like they need to solve a riddle to like understand what you do. Like it should be like pretty clear, like we have a hypothesis about a pain or problem you have, and here's what we do for that. And like, make it real simple, make it clear, make it actionable. And like, it's okay if you're wrong. Like, I think that's probably the biggest thing is like, it's better to have like a strong hypothesis or a perspective that you lead with in your kind of copy and your message than allowing your customer to figure out if this is for me or not based on some more vague and broad value proposition. I think you get a lot more, it becomes effective for two reasons. Is like, it's more effective because if you're more narrow, you're more precise, like with the copy, like you're going to get people more likely to like bite of like, okay, yeah, that's me. You're also like, you're kind of constraining your test more narrowly. So you can start figuring out like, okay, when I say this type of thing to this type of person, we aren't getting any bites. And like, that's valuable signal too, right? So I think like, copy is, I guess one big thing is like, it's not just about finding what works. You need to find also what works by virtue of what doesn't work. And if you let everything kind of breathe too much and it gets kind of broad and wide and big values and big platitudes, it becomes really difficult to know, like, all right, when it works, what worked, you know? So I don't know, maybe that's a place to start, but I'm excited to dig in on this more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really good start. Zach, I want to just fling a fastball right back at you here. So, because I really want to know, I really want to know your answer to this question. I know this is like we're going to go sometimes high level or sometimes deep. Okay, so like old emails was just generic copy. Then it was hi first name, right? Then let's like skip ahead a little bit, and you have people start using like things like agents like Clayagent to write like a templated GPT inspired email. Like, okay, so I'm emailing a CRO, and I work in B2B SaaS and do a couple bit of tweaks, but that's like working off of generic public data set. I would love for you to just explain, like, just with, I mean, we can talk our own shop a little bit here, like with what Octave does, like, why does it matter to have your own ICP data? If you want to be, using AI and you want to be doing this personalization that's showing up in your copy, like, what's the difference between like pulling from a public data set versus something that you've curated, whether it's in Octave or it's somewhere else? Like,
Yeah.
like, is it just a little bit better, or is it like much different? Why is it different? I'm curious if you guys don't mind me going deep on that.
Yeah, I think it's like a good, slightly, it's getting to the heart of the matter question. I think what people respond to is like, if you lean too much on like the public stuff that's already out there, everyone's like, yeah, I know that. Like, you're telling me about myself. Got it. So it's like,
right. Yeah. Hey, as a CRO, you want your reps to book more meetings, right? It's like, sure.
Right. So it's like that. It's important. Like there's some element of like, I guess how we think about it is like the public stuff is like your copy, like you need to have some proof of work, right? And like, I think it's like, again, like I don't think people care at the end of the day, like, did AI do the work or not, right? Like, these are systems we set up to hopefully be like smart and like do the work for us. But it's like, you need a little bit of proof of work of like, we've done something to try and assess you're a fit in our market and you're a fit for X reason. And then I think that also needs to be grounded, I guess, like, and like talking our book a little bit of like, we have a perspective. Like, we built a company and we built this solution for a reason, and we think it's good for you for X. And like, I think it's like the marriage of those things, which is like, it's kind of like the proof of work, and it could be how we found you. It could be like why you're relevant. It could be something very timely signal based. It could be the scenario of like, hey, we saw you do that. We saw you starred this GitHub repo. Like, it's that code tells us you're interested in something like super specific, right? So like you do have those moments where you can like latch onto something and like just sink your teeth into something this is the reason, and that's all I need to talk about. But I think like I guess like the majority case is like, you kind of got to blend this, like, like we got to you for a reason. And like, I want you to like quickly pick up like why we got to you, but like, here's our story, and I need you to kind of react.
So if
I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
so if 1-800-Flowers was a listing to this podcast episode, they should be mindful of the fact that you said you didn't have any plans for Valentine's Day, and that would be a good trigger to get you to actually.
Yeah.
I'm getting
snooze that for 11 months. So then in whatever next year, they're like, hey, Zach, it's coming up again. Are you ready?
Slow it again, brother.
Oh, that's good.
But yeah, I'm curious. Does that resonate with you, Harris, or what do you think of kind of the blend?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because we play around. I run a little bit of our own outbound. Like, I sent a cold email the other day. It was a one-off. I wrote it manually, and I'm going to read it because we're on a show and it's just helpful, I think, for people to hear it. It's short. So I'm emailing a Smart Lead partner because we integrate with Smart Lead. We're helping a bunch of other agencies sync data for their clients from Smart Lead into HubSpot. We're finding they're driving 2 to 3 times more leads than their clients realized before, because we push over company level tracking. So any conversion is getting captured, and now the agency gets credit. Can I show you the loom I made with how it works? ? And I got a response like 2 minutes later. And the interesting thing is, like, I have in the past sent emails sort of similar to this, but I thought of you with Octave because HubSpot has like a really basic ICP widget that I went through, and I did this exercise, and I went back and forth with ChatGPT, and I was like, oh yeah, like this is really what Octave does, like the much higher level version of this. But anyway, I got started with it, and it was that like 2 to 3 times more leads thing. I realized like that was the key to make the copy convert, and that's like real data. An actual agency partner of ours went into their HubSpot customers portal, looked into the dashboards, looked at the attribution, and was literally like, oh, there's 2.5 times more here that we influenced in pipeline than we thought. And then another agency did a similar thing. It was like they booked 52 meetings instead of they had only gotten credit for 17. And I think like I, from the outside, had always heard this and always seen this copy. And even when I ran my agency before, talking to clients, and it always felt like people were kind of making up these numbers of like, oh, we can double your this or that or whatever. And so I do think it has to be rooted in real data, like more meetings. I'm SDR. I want more meetings. But if you're in your industry, like reps are booking like 5 meetings a week, and so then you say, well, we can take you from 5 to 7. Like that matters more. That like little bit of detail where it like fits. And so that was kind of my thought on like copy for the week, was like when I was reviewing that and like, oh yeah, that makes sense that you would have more impact by this amount, not just like this generic like 10x your revenue or something like that. So that's kind of where I was thinking about you and thinking about why the ICP matters versus a generic like public GPT being like more better. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I think like I'm glad you read that example, because like that's like a case study in like, hey, I know who you are. You're an agency. I know a tool you might use. Great. Like that's the proof of work, right? And then the copy has this inherent hypothesis of like, oh, like I know you're anxious about like just being an appointment setter and like you live and die by this kind of metric. I can help you improve that metric. And then great, awesome, opt-in CTA. Can I send you more? Right? Like don't ask me to look at my calendar, get stressed out. Like, yeah, I want to see that video. So like that, I think that was like beautiful.
I do think it's the best cold email I've ever written, and I've been doing this for a while. And I was like finally like, oh, like did I like it made me most optimistic about what we're doing. I was like, do I have it? That's the thing about cold outbound, I think, that people don't realize is like if what you're doing isn't working, outbound isn't going to fix it. But it can validate if it is working. If you know. And that was why I was like, oh, even when I was writing it, I was like, yeah, this is good. Like it makes sense. I don't know, Brendan, what do you think? What are you seeing with RP, and like, what copy are you seeing working? I mean, this is like a big thing, different of like inbound and marketing versus sales emails. What do you think?
I think with what you were just describing, one thing that was not caught or it wasn't said yet that I think made that effective is we forget this device. And what I mean by that is brevity is really important. So it needs to fit on a phone, because I bet 90%, especially if you're going after executives, they're probably looking at their phone. They're not on their laptop all day long. And that example that you just shared with me, there's probably 3 sentences, maybe 4. And so it can actually fit within that screen for most people to actually take action on. I think that we often forget, like, well, what we've seen is that people forget how to actually write. What I mean by that is not that they can't write, but how to actually write. And so it's one in terms of the length. Yes, it's what Zach described in terms of hyper-targeted with the value impact, but it's also conversational. And people don't read. They skim and scan, especially if it's long. So I can't tell you how many times. I mean, I got hit up probably 15 times today. I just deleted every single email and it's the same person. And if I don't want to shame somebody on this podcast if you listen, but if you email me one more time, I will blacklist you, which will go back to your domain score that we talked about before. But we've actually seen, well, to shout out to both of you guys, but even in a recent example that we doubled the target for our customers using Octave plus outbound sync. And so it's, for us, it's the things you just described, in addition to what I just mentioned, of just making sure that's very tight, relevant for that buyer. That's what's been working for us. And I like what you just said too, Harris, or I think it was actually Zach. Don't force the meeting link, because that does create stress. Like, you gave a value add without a request. And so I know a lot of people like ask, like you want to ask for something in return, but no, it's like give it away. There's actually a lot more value in of just being there to provide insight as opposed to expecting something in return.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's one thing I tell people all the time is like, you're better off like try and do discovery in your cold outbound versus asking for the meeting. Like, ask an interesting question and like you engage with people, right? Like, hey, what payroll system do you use? Like, if that's relevant, right? Like, that's so much more likely to get our system. Oh no, we don't use ADP, we use Gusto. What, like, and then boom, like I got a little piece of info there. Like, and like asking for the meeting right away is just, it's so unlikely to convert. And you have this opportunity where like people are, there is like a, some level of like fiduciary responsibility for like executives and people in these leadership positions of like, I need to kind of know what's going on. Like you can't shut yourself off to the world completely, even if you hate getting cold emails. Like there's stuff happening out there that you don't know about. So like make it easy to like engage with people, give them information. They are, a lot of people are going through their emails and scanning them, and like just make sure those are like high quality moments that you're creating. Like I think that's the idea. Like this stuff compounds over time, and just make sure you're putting out those good moments. It's clear, there's no riddle. They associate our name with cool customers and problems we solve, and like it'll work. This is it's gotten harder, but it's not impossible.
It reminds me of, there's a Jed Marley, he does outbound stuff. He kind of got started at PandaDoc, but he had a classic one when PandaDoc was competing against DocuSign. He would just like, it's hard to know if someone's using DocuSign or not because it's not, you can't find it with built with because it's like not on their website really, so it's not discoverable very easily. Some tools have that kind of technographic data, but a lot it's hard to find. Anyway, he would just assume because they're the gorilla in the room, they're the category creator, they're a publicly traded company. He would just be like, hey, like, you don't have to use DocuSign anymore. Whatever, his emails were better than that. But, hey, we're better than DocuSign. Here's why. And like almost every time, because they were so dominant, it was right that they were using DocuSign. Or like you said, they would be like, oh, actually, we're using, whatever, something else. So sometimes with copy, like you do all this extra refinement, but other times you just kind of, you can make some assumptions, I think, depending on your category. And especially if you're a big challenger brand, you can kind of assume a little bit.
Right. Yeah. I think that's like, we were like talking about that before too. Just like, don't be shy about like having a perspective and like taking an educated guess. Like people will appreciate that more than, if you're trying to do the super personal, saw you went to this school or you previously worked at blah, blah, blah. And like, you're trying to make these like crazy connections. Like that is so much more likely to fail than like, good educated guess. I bet you use AWS and Azure. Like that's probably the case. And like now use that as like the launch point for like something relevant to what the hell you do, right?
Oh, I totally agree with that point. Especially if you compare it to the alternative. If the alternative is like weird personalization that doesn't matter, totally.
Yeah. Just to kind of bring it full circle, I know we're up on time, but I liked how you were going, Harris, in terms of like went from cold email, then we had like first name personalization token to then getting into being able to capture even more personalization. Zach, I think you're probably more on the forefront as it relates to where the market is going than candidly than I am, or probably Harris to that extent. Like, what are you seeing as like that next frontier that our audience should be aware of and what they really can do? I know we talk a lot about AI, but what are those things that you're seeing at Octave or in the market that you would say, hey, if you're not already doing these things, go to market leader, you really need to start considering this for this year?
I think maybe like one of the big things like we're seeing on the horizon, and again, like we want to be a part of it, is like there's been the world has been like really built around like templates with variables and split testing and A/B testing, and like that stuff is good, and you don't want a million variables, but like part of the magic of AI and having more like fluidity in your story is like, let's not do A/B testing. Like let's do A through N testing, like let's have some more good shots on goal and figure out what's working. And it's like, I think it's been, there's like teams have always kind of known this of like, you do, you get these campaigns that are kind of like, this has one story, A story and B story. And like, you look at like maybe performance and it's like, it's hard to judge, like, is the copy working or not? We don't really know. But then if you like inspect it and somebody looks at like every interaction, you start going like, oh, it's like, really, it's like these type of people and these types of things we talk about when you're at this type of company. And like, I think that kind of like alpha, it like ends up getting buried in like all these like narrow templated approaches, but it, like there's stuff in there that works. I think like what we're seeing is like, hey, open the aperture of like test more ideas at once so you can really figure out like where that alpha lies. Yeah, like what's getting picked up in the market.
And what about, and maybe as we wrap up, Harris, or feel free, Zach, too, on this one, I think there's always just a mindset that these type of tactics are really designed for, like, when we think outbound, whatever we're going to call it, whatever that word is, but prospecting for a new customer. But I think I'm speaking for myself, I shouldn't speak for everybody. It seems like there is just as big of an opportunity, if not bigger, for your own like nurture database. And so instead of getting into like these traditional nurture campaigns, there seems to be a really I think a really exciting opportunity now to say, like, instead you have this database now over a period of time, like how can we start to take those signals to actually drive something with all this technology that's now been created. So I don't know, Zach, Harris, if you have any thoughts on that as we wrap up, because I think could be an interesting topic.
I mean, I totally agree with that. I mean, I'll just answer briefly, which is that like I think the CRM needs to be the place that this data lives, and you need to hook other things into it to be able to monitor signals. And ideally, human beings are making these judgment calls of like when's the right time, what's the right message, and they're using automation and agents and other tools to help them do that efficiently. And I think that if we start monitoring companies earlier, we can send them better messages when things come up. So I totally agree. To me, the linchpin for that is the CRM, and is the process in the CRM and the data hygiene and the like hierarchy of like how properties are set up and having the right views for the right reps and the stuff that RP does. I mean, to me, without that, so I agree, but only if you have a foundation under your feet to do it. Otherwise, like you're better off. It'll be easier to just go rip some lists from databases than try to do this with like a bad system, I think, because you're just going to annoy people. You're going to email the wrong people, and you're going to email customers, and you're going to email like, former employees. If you have, I mean, who knows, so yes, but only if you have a good foundation, I think.
Yeah. Such a good future episode. Zach, I'll let you noodle on that one as well.
Yeah. I'll end with a quick, amen to that. Like, yeah, if all this experimentation happens in the satellite office down the street, like it's not going to work. Like it needs to be part of the mothership. So, amen.
But I think it's crazy. Not crazy. I do think there is this idea that I can just do it outside of that and just continue. And I think testing, to your point, is really valuable. But if you're not tracking and monitoring, then you're really doing yourself and ultimately the customer a disservice.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I know time is up, but it was great catching up with you guys. Thanks for the tips and tricks as it relates to email copy. We'll get back at it for another episode of Go to Market Crossroads next week. But until then, have a great week. Zach, hopefully you figure out some plans for Valentine's Day. And Harris, I hope the party goes well.
Episode 2 in the bag, onto the real important stuff.
See you guys.
All right. See you guys.